Assalamu alaikum. How you doing?
Good. I'm Doha.
What's up, Doha? How you doing? Good to meet you.
I'm good.
Alhamdulillah. Hey, Tyler, what's going on, man? How you doing? You okay?
So I was gonna ask you. We've come like a few times.
Okay.
Things like that. And Tyler's like learning about Islam, and
Yeah.
I'm trying to like. I find myself trying to explain things to
Yes.
him, but like, cause like I guess I'm just asking you. Could you?
For more resources?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like a
absolutely.
little bit more background. Like,
Yeah.
Whenever you're like, oh, the Battle of Badr, I was like,
Yeah. Yeah. So it's going to be a little bit challenging in these sessions just because we're kind of stuck in. I'll do my best.
Yeah.
But why don't we? I mean, it's hard to meet up these days, but why don't we talk? Why don't we like get a cup of coffee or something? If you have any questions, if you want to like learn anything else or have any other things that you were confused about, like just you can have my number. You can reach out anytime. Yeah. So if you want to take my number, just shoot me a text.
I figured there's like a bug next to you. So sorry, it's on the line.
That's okay. That's fine. Yeah, that guy's been here actually the whole time. So things are done. 865 776 0597. Got it?
Yeah, I got it.
Cool. Awesome, man. Thanks, Tyler. Shoot me a text. Got you. Okay. Wow, that was quick. All right. So we'll be in touch, man. Whenever you got anything, let me know. Okay?
If I'm
All right.
saying something to him in the back,
Yeah, for sure. Don't even trip. I got you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
No problem. Alrighty. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Welcome back. Welcome to our temporary home. I hope that everybody, inshallah, is doing well. And hope everyone's enjoying the nicer weather and getting your outdoor time in as much as you can before we get to the frigid temps, inshallah. We are going to continue, inshallah, and today's session is a little bit on the shorter side. Maghrib comes in around 7:35, so we'll be probably ending around 7:45, inshallah. But that's okay because the journey that we're about to embark on in this part of the narrative is actually like a massive story, and so it's good to do it in two parts. But to understand where we've been and where we are and kind of how far we've come, the position in which the Prophet ﷺ is in right now in the Sirah and the Muslims of Medina are in right now in the Sirah is, this has been a long 20 years of teaching Islam and engaging with not only the Quraysh, not only Meccans, but all of Arabia. And there have been like a variety of different responses. You had the outright rejection, you had the torture and the harassment, you had the acceptance, and you had those who benevolently declined, but still wanted to be cordial, right? Like socially cordial. And so really on the spectrum of how the message of Islam was received, you have so many different milestones on that spectrum. But one group or one tribe, one family that just refused to budge and refused to give any sort of way to the Muslims of Medina was the Quraysh. The Quraysh, this tribe, these people from Mecca, from the hometown of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessing be upon him, and they refused to budge even an inch. The only thing that they had done that showed any sort of goodwill up until this point was when they signed the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, which was a treaty in which they promised each other, the Muslims and the Quraysh, promised that there would be peace for 10 years. Okay, so that this would be something that they wouldn't have to worry about. And again, the primary concern of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was what? It wasn't world domination. It wasn't domination of the Arabian Gulf. It was being able to make sure that his community could thrive and could survive in Medina. That was it. That we don't want to have to wake up one morning and hear that Quraysh has mobilized 10,000 troops. We don't want to have to worry about that. We want to be able to build our community, and y'all can stay over there. Lakum dinukum waliya din. Like, you have your faith and we have ours. Let's just leave each other alone. And many of the tribes in Arabia had actually come to that conclusion. Many of the different people had actually come to that. They'd say, okay, you know what? Let's just leave each other be. But Quraysh was that one tribe that because their motivations were not like economic, and they weren't even, you know, power related. Their motivations were actually just ideological. That they at their very core just disagreed fundamentally and wanted the message of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to stop fundamentally, in part because they knew who he was. And we're actually going to get to a very interesting part of the story today when Abu Sufyan, who's one of the leaders of Quraysh, that, spoiler alert, when he accepts Islam, because he does, he actually, his journey to accept Islam is very interesting. And we'll talk about, he kind of reveals why the Quraysh would not just accept. He reveals it, he gives it up. But that ideological barrier was something that would never be resolved. You know, if you have a disagreement with somebody that has to do with like money, or if you have a disagreement with somebody that has to do about, you know, some sort of aggression or something that they said or did, you can always pretty much find a resolution, right? There's some sort of compromise. But when it comes to ideologies, when it comes to belief, philosophical, principled, you know, foundations, those are disagreements that, you know, you're going to have to live and let live, agree to disagree, as they say. And there will always be that tension. There will always be that roughness, so long as each person digs their heels into that ideology. And so this was the state of the Muslims in Medina, that they knew that nothing was going to change. They weren't going to sacrifice any of their beliefs. And they also knew that the Meccans were not interested in sacrificing any of theirs. So the best that they could achieve was not that they were going to compromise, but that, you know what, let's just give each other some space. We don't have to see each other. Okay? You're over there, we're over here. And one of the pieces of that treaty, the Treaty of Hudaybiyah that we talked about, the 10-year agreement, was not only between the Muslims themselves and the Quraysh, but also between the allies. That my allies and your allies, they're also going to pledge peace between one another. So the Muslims said, if we have anybody that we have an alliance with, any tribes, that they're not going to attack you or anybody that you have an alliance with. And we expect the same in return. And the Quraysh said yes. So this peace treaty is a very comprehensive one. It's not just one-on-one. It's actually multiple tribes saying that they're going to give peace to multiple tribes. So this is actually a huge victory if you consider what it does to the culture of where the Prophet ﷺ is. It establishes peace for a decade. No war, right? It's amazing, right? It's crazy because we have just been constantly so immersed in the culture of war ever since I've been alive, right? America's been basically at war with somebody. And so to imagine this kind of effort to make peace in an entire region, despite the differences, no one accepted anyone else's claims. They just said, we don't want to fight. It's actually remarkable. Now, what happened, and you can't control everybody, and this is kind of a, you know, this is kind of a proof of that. One of the tribes that had an alliance with Mecca, their name was the tribe of Bekr. They saw this kind of quiet time, this kind of peaceful, tranquil time, as a chance to get even with some other tribes that they had beef with. So the tribe that they did not like was known as Khuza'a, right? So you had Bekr and you had Khuza'a, okay? It was like the bears and the lions. Alhamdulillah, the bears won. Alhamdulillah. Allahumma ansur ad-dubab. May Allah give victory to the bears. All right? Football season has come upon us. It's only a couple weeks till COVID shuts it down, so let's enjoy it, inshallah, okay? So you had Bekr and Khuza'a. These are two tribes that did not like each other. Now, Khuza'a is on the side of the Muslims in Medina. They're like, we're your allies. Bekr on the side of Quraysh. What does that mean? That means what? Doesn't matter what beef you had, you have to respect each other now. This is a comprehensive treaty. Bekr unfortunately says that, you know what? Now that no one's expecting battle or war, no one's going to be carrying their swords or their shields, this is a perfect chance for us to get revenge, get retribution. So they end up planning an attack on one of the smaller families, in the clan of Khuza'a. They end up planning an attack. Now, Khuza'a lived very close to Mecca. Even though they were in alliance with the Muslims in Medina, they lived very close to Mecca. So as they're being attacked by this other tribe named Bekr, who are on the side of the Quraysh, they start to retreat back into Mecca. Khuza'a starts to go back into Mecca. They retreat back to their home. Now, what's interesting about Mecca, for those of you who maybe may or may not know, it's called the Haram, right? The area, Al-Haram al-Makki. It's called the sanctified land, the Meccan sanctuary. Sanctuary means what? What's not allowed there? What's not allowed in sanctuaries? Remember the whole debate and discussion about sanctuary cities? What's not allowed? Like aggression, violence, right? Oppression. It's not allowed there. It shouldn't be allowed anywhere, but when a place has been identified and designated as a sanctuary, and this is something that even pre-Quranic revelation was accepted by the Arabs, that there are some places and some times that are simply just sanctified. And that means that you don't engage in any sort of conflict. You don't engage in any sort of battle. So when the Khuza'a retreated back into Mecca, this was sort of like, they weren't going to fight back because they knew that they were part of a treaty. And they said, well, the best we can do is we can go to a place where we know that they can't come get us. So they retreated back, and one of the leaders of Bekr, the tribe that was the aggressor, his name was Nawfal. I'm sorry if your name is Nawfal, right? His name was Nawfal, and he was one of the leaders. When they were fighting and they realized that they had crossed the line, literally, by the way, the boundary of Mecca is like a line. When you cross it, it's like, imagine like you hit someone, then run back. You can't touch me now, right? So when they realized that they were entering Mecca, some of the warriors from Bekr were telling Nawfal, hey, like, can't fight anymore. We can't fight anymore. Do you want to displease God? Like, why would you even consider this? And Nawfal says, today, he says, I have no God. He says, today I have no God. And he said that today is the day that we finally defeat these people. We take our revenge. And then listen to what he says. This is amazing. Again, the reason why studying history, especially Islamic history, is so important, the life of the Prophet ﷺ, you realize that things are not that out of touch. You know what he says? He says, and he looks at the people that are reminding him, those people who are telling him, stop fighting, stop fighting. He looks at them and he says, and by the way, I was with you in Mecca, in the holy city, in the holy land where you can't commit atrocities and wrongs, and I saw you stealing from the marketplace. I saw you. You're telling me not to fight? I saw you stealing. So he said, are you so holy that you can steal, but now when it comes to fighting, you can't fight? You guys see the twisted logic, right? And this is something, by the way, this is something definitely that, number one, shaitan does to us. Shaitan kind of convinces us that, well, you already have these mistakes that you do, so why not just kind of go all in? You're already getting the double cheeseburger and fries, just get a Coke as well, right? There's that joke, like, why do people get a double cheeseburger and fries and then order like a water or a Diet Coke? It's because of their calorie counting. They can't have the Coke, right? You can tell where I'm at. Okay, no, but seriously, we've been taught, right, by a very polar society that you're either perfect or you're not, right? And who were the best teachers in school? The ones who gave you partial credit. Those are the ones you were like, I love you, right? Like, you're like, I make dua for you. They're like, what's that? You're like, don't worry, I just do it, right? You give partial credit, I make dua for you. Allah gives partial credit. And yet you have some people, right? Some individuals, may Allah protect us from ever being one of those people, that try to impose upon people that you're either perfect or you're nothing. And if you're not perfect, you might as well be nothing, because there's no point in you trying. Oh, you don't, well, why would you worry about praying? You don't dress like the way that the Prophet ﷺ said so. Why would you worry about giving charity? You don't pray. Why would you worry about reading Quran? You don't give charity. Like, it's like a never-ending line, right? And then you look back and you see like a weakness or a deficiency, and you're like, well, I guess I shouldn't do anything. That's actually, number one, it's not Islamic, and number two, it will never lead to a person bettering themselves, right? So in Islam, we have the idea, do whatever good you can whenever you can. Do whatever good you can whenever you can. Don't discount your good that you have, this opportunity in front of you, just because of something you're struggling with or a history that you have. Doesn't matter how many prayers you missed, pray the next one. It doesn't matter if after you pray the next one, you miss the following one, pray the one after that. I'll never forget one time when I was younger, there was a father who came to me and he's like, my son doesn't pray. And he brought his son to me, right? This is like intervention. They thought it was like an intervention. He's like, my son doesn't pray. And this is a long time ago, man. This is like a decade ago. And I remember one thing that Sheikh Abdel Nasser used to teach us was that prayer, every prayer is its own responsibility to Allah. Not all the prayers, but every prayer, every individual one. So Sheikh Abdel Nasser used to teach us that you should pray whatever prayers you can. Ideally, of course, 5 prayers. It's the bare minimum. It's 5 minutes per prayer, 5 times a day. You know, just get off TikTok and you'll do it. Trust me, right? Just get off Instagram and you'll have time. But I remember sitting with the dad and the dad was like, my son doesn't pray. And I remember telling the dad and telling the son in front of the dad, how many prayers do you pray per day? He said, none, 0. I said, okay, well, at least we're starting fresh. I said, can you give me 1 prayer a day? And the kid looks at me and he goes, yeah, I could try, right? Which, like, if you've ever struggled with prayer, which raise your hand if you have, we all have, right? If you know, you don't have to, sorry, that was rhetorical. I should have said that, I'm sorry. We all have, everybody has, it's okay. If you've ever struggled with prayer, you know that like making that commitment is a big deal. And guess what the dad does? It's all or nothing. So the dad goes, no, what kind of crazy Islam is this? You're telling my son 1 prayer? Allah said 5 prayers. And he looks at, he looks like he just found like the most fraudulent imam in the world. He's like, what are you doing? And I tried to explain to the father, I was like, look, 1 is better than nothing. 5 is the ideal. 1 is better than nothing. And I said, if you look at the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you find that for the first 10, 13 years, that the companions, they were only ordained to pray twice a day. There was a gradualism that was instilled into the practice of Islam, into the ordainment of prayer, that not everything came down at once, right? And that's why when we're working on ourselves, we also have to give ourselves what's called tadarruj. We have to accomplish these goals by levels, right? So Naufal here, he kind of references this very unfortunate toxic logic, which is you guys are trying to respect some of God's laws, but you don't respect all of them. So who are you anyways? And I want you to know that that is a very dangerous place to be. It's dangerous to give yourself concession because of that. And it's equally as dangerous to tell others that their good is worthless because of that. We don't operate that way. It's not the way the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam operated, right? And so because of that, he ended up convincing the tribe of Bekr that yes, we should end up fighting. He convinced them. He said, let's go ahead and fight. And they ended up going in, they ended up fighting. And what's the problem here is that there's a treaty and they're fighting in Mecca, which is the home of Quraysh. So Quraysh at least has a responsibility. If they can't stop them, they at least have to what? They at least have to go up against them. They at least have to take arms against them. They weren't able to do that. In fact, the Quraysh actually started fighting alongside the transgressors, the tribe of Bekr. Now, when this skirmish or this small battle had ended, some of the representatives from the tribe of Khuza'ah that was oppressed, they went back and they told the Prophet ﷺ immediately. They sent a delegation and they reminded the Prophet ﷺ of their agreement. And the Prophet ﷺ said, absolutely, you don't have to tell me twice. I remember. And he said that you will have our support. You have our support. We signed on. We got your back. Now, when the skirmish had ended and the Quraysh kind of came down from their arrogant sort of place, they started to realize what they had done wrong. They started to realize that they had violated this really, really important pact that they had. And they started to scramble for whatever it is that they could do to solve this problem. They started to think to themselves, this is another reality, by the way, spiritual reality. You learn so much, right? That something at the moment might sound like a great idea, right? It might sound like it's going to be awesome. And you know in your heart of hearts, your heart is saying, don't do it. Right? Don't do it. Like, just don't do it. Okay? You know. And this isn't the only spiritual. It's also everything else. You know that if you have to get up early for work the next day, staying up late is not a good idea. You know, you see the clock, it says, 11:30 or whatever, and you're like, now is probably a good time for me to be an adult and go ahead and make sure that I've prayed and then go to sleep and brush my teeth, of course, right? Don't want to miss that. People call me out. They're like, he doesn't brush his teeth. Okay? But now fast forward, it's 1:45 and you're like, I'm going to hate my life tomorrow morning because I made a horrible decision, right? So when you come down from that, you're like, man, I should not have done that. That's what Quraysh was experiencing. It's very important to think a few steps ahead. Be like, when it comes to your spirituality, be like a great chess player. Chess players can always see ahead. Be like a great soccer player. Soccer players can always see like 3 passes ahead. They know what's happening. Understand what's going to happen to your soul if you do something, right? We shouldn't be surprised that when I don't engage in prayer or remembrance of Allah, it shouldn't surprise us that I feel distant from Allah. It's something that mathematically I know that it's going to happen. It shouldn't surprise me, right? So when I engage in that or I don't engage in what I should be doing, then I end up feeling distant. I knew it was coming. So Quraysh, they knew. So what did they do? They ended up sending one of their leaders, Abu Sufyan, to Medina. And Abu Sufyan shows up and he looked guilty as anything. And he comes and his daughter, right? This is kind of an interesting fact many of us may not know. His daughter, Habiba, was actually one of the wives of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So I want you to imagine like Abu Sufyan is one of the greatest enemies. This is like the in-laws to the next degree. Okay, Abu Sufyan is like one of the greatest enemies of the Prophet ﷺ at this time. He later accepts Islam, but at this time, and his daughter married the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So he shows up to Medina. What does he do? He's a father-in-law. So he walks into his daughter's house, Habiba, and he sits down. He wants to sit down on like the mattress. Back then, they used to kind of only have one sitting area, and it was also where they slept. So he wants to sit down on the mattress, and Habiba, she's a boss, mashallah. She takes the mattress and she rolls it up. And Abu Sufyan looks at her and he's like, I don't know how to interpret that. Do you think that I'm too good for the mattress or do you think that the mattress is too good for me? And she said, door number 2. She goes, I would never let you sit on the mattress of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he's shocked. He looks at her and he's like, excuse me? Now remember who Abu Sufyan is. Abu Sufyan is literally trying to murder her husband. He's trying to kill him. And Abu Sufyan, by the way, was a gifted poet. He used to recite a lot of poetry. He used to release diss tracks against the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam consistently. And these things, by the way, if everyone, whenever we say people recited poetry against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and everyone's like, yeah, that sounds annoying. It wasn't just annoying. It was propaganda. Remember that a good poem in Arabia was like a #1 hit here in America. So if they recited this poetry and if it was catchy enough and it was beautiful enough, this would now take on the form of like, a viral video. So this stuff wasn't just, oh, he hurt my feelings. Oh, he said something mean about me. This was, no, he's actually producing media. He's producing content to try to take people away from even listening to the message that I have. So asking his daughter for help, he comes to her and he says, I'm in a really serious predicament. Can you help me? He doesn't admit what happened to anybody, by the way. And he says, can you help me? And she said, no, I can't help you. And so then he moves on and he goes to some of his old friends from Mecca. He goes to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and he says, Abu Bakr, can you help me? And Abu Bakr says, no, I'm not interested in helping you. Right? Omar, he goes to Omar, he says, Omar, can you help me? Omar said, man, if you wanted to fight me over a handful of dust, I would fight you over it. Like, I would fight you over a candy wrapper. I hate you so much. Like, literally, he's like, you are the most despised person to me. Why are you asking me for help? Okay? So then he decides, you know what? I'm just going to go speak to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam directly. And I'm not going to tell him what happened because, of course, that's a huge violation. That's like a declaration of war. but I'm going to go to him and I'm going to see if I can kind of, patch things up without actually showing him where the hole is, so to speak. So he goes to the Prophet ﷺ and he says, hey, he says, do you know that agreement we had, that peace treaty? Now remember, the Prophet already knows. ﷺ, he knows. So do you know that peace treaty we signed 2 years ago for the decade? Isn't it so great? Isn't peace wonderful? And the Prophet ﷺ said, do you have anything that you need? What are you here for? Not being rude, but just kind of like, okay. Remember, this is a person that is literally plotting to come with their army and destroy your city. So the Prophet ﷺ was like, we're not going to attack you, but why are you here? So he said, well, these past 2 years have been so amazing and peaceful. I just want to extend the peace treaty. Let's add another 10 years. Let's make it 20. So what's he trying to do? He's trying to do a little bit of an optical illusion, right? He's trying to say, let's extend the peace treaty without bringing up the very real violation that just occurred. So the Prophet ﷺ, he says, okay, why are you here? Why are you talking about this now? Did something happen? Have you done anything wrong? Why are you bringing this up? And Abu Sufyan says, no, of course not. We did everything okay. So the Prophet ﷺ said, okay, let's think about this then. I'm not going to agree right now. Let's just think about it. Because he knows what actually went down. So the Prophet, so Abu Sufyan is very scared now because he has a feeling that the Prophet ﷺ knows. He goes to Ali bin Abi Talib and he asks Ali, he says, Ali, you are like my relative, because they were distantly related. Abu Sufyan was actually distantly related to the Prophet ﷺ. So he goes to Ali and says, Ali, you're like my cousin, my nephew. You're like a brother to me. And he goes, I need you to get the Prophet ﷺ to agree to this and to give us like this unconditional peace. And Ali says, I don't think I can help you there. I think you're on your own, right? And he said, when the Prophet of Allah makes decisions like this, none of us change his mind. We go with him. He's the one that's being guided by Allah. And so he basically now feels like he's completely out of luck. So what does he do? He goes and he publicly announces in the middle of Medina, he says that I want all the Muslims to know that they have unconditional peace from Quraysh. You know what he's doing? You guys know when you've done something wrong and you overcompensate big time? You know when you've made a mistake, right? You've made someone upset. You really upset your parents, or you upset your spouse, or you upset even your kids, man. Like I'll tell you, Musa's 3 years old. The guilt trips this kid puts on me, man. He's memorizing Quran, and every time he finishes a surah, we're buying him a gift. I know it's not ideal, but just when you're a parent, just call me. We'll talk about it, right? So he's memorizing, and when he finishes, he's like, Baba, did you order the gift yet? And I'm like, no. And he's like, but you said that when I finish Surah Kawthar, I can get the monster truck. And I said, I know, I haven't had time. He said, Baba, you're not being very nice. And he actually, I'm not even exaggerating in the least bit. He literally uses this language. He goes, Baba, that's not very nice. And I'm like, okay, right? So then I buy him like 3 monster trucks to overcompensate, because I don't want him to be like 23 and he's like, yeah, I don't believe in Islam because my dad promised me monster trucks and I memorized Quran and he never gave it to me. Right? He's gonna, yeah. Anyways, I don't want to keep going, but may Allah protect us all. So he ends up overcompensating big time, just like we all do. You do something wrong, you know that you're wrong. The person that you've wronged, they're kind of making it worse by not bringing it up. So you're like, God, this is horrible, right? Just yell at me, right? My mom used to give me the silent treatment. I'm like, just yell. And she's like, Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakeel, right? She used to give me the Egyptian 3 fingers, which is like, just wait till the day of judgment. And you're like, just yell, please, get it out. No, you want someone to acknowledge it. The Prophet ﷺ did not acknowledge the mistake, so he declares unconditional peace from Quraysh. Monumental. Unheard of. You know what the Prophet ﷺ says back? The greatest burn of all time. He says, that's on your side. We didn't say anything. He goes, Abu Sufyan, you're trying to force us into some unconditional agreement, and you're not dealing with what happened, right? Because you can't always gain closure from something unless you've let it process. So the Prophet ﷺ could have been like, okay, unconditional peace. But He's a principled person. He knows that someone has been wronged. And before he can speak on behalf of accepting peace in this moment, someone's justice has to be restored. Their right has to be restored. So he tells Abu Sufyan, you're announcing peace? That's on you, dude. We still have some things to talk about. So Abu Sufyan leaves. When he leaves, the Prophet ﷺ tells 2 or 3 people max. That it's time for us to gather the troops. We're going to march to Mecca. Gather the army. We're marching to Mecca. We're going to go and we're going to take retribution on what happened to our allies, Khuzah. We're going to go and defend them. But he told his wife Aisha, he told Abu Bakr, he told Omar, only a couple people, because he didn't want word to spread. He didn't want it to get out, right? Because you need the element of surprise. So as he's preparing, there's a companion by the name of Hatib ibn Abi Balta'a. And if you don't remember his name for anything else, this story will probably shock you. It's incredible. Hatib was somebody who was not from Mecca. He didn't have family ties there, but he moved there and his family still lived there. They were Muslim and he was Muslim. Not only was he Muslim, but he was somebody that took part. He was Muslim back in Mecca, right? Which what do the scholars say about being Muslim in Mecca? If a person was Muslim during the Meccan era, there was literally no benefit. There was only pain. There was only difficulty being Muslim back then. If somebody accepted the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca, they are what we would call now an OG. They are a real one, right? The 100 emoji, like that's what you would assign them. So he was one of those. Not only that, he took part in the Battle of Badr. What was the Battle of Badr? We talked about it last week. It was when the Muslims had a couple hundred, like 300 people armed with sticks and leaves against an army of over 1,000 Quraysh coming with horses and swords and arrows. And he took part there. Why am I saying this? Because the people who lived in Mecca as believers, the ones who went through difficulty, the ones who lived and fought in Badr, they have a special status with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? When you maintain your faith through difficulty, you gain closeness to Allah that cannot be gained through easy times. When you have faith in tests, you gain a closeness to God that you cannot get when times are good. Think about when you went through a difficult time with somebody in your life. Are you close to that person? Having gone through that, there's a reason why they talk about people who go to war together, like war buddies, veterans, right? There's a reason why people are able to maintain that connection because they struggled together. They talk about how difficult times were and now they've made it. The friendships that you make in those times are much more deep, the cultivated relationships, much more strong than the ones when times were good. That's why you always look to some of your closest friends are the ones who have been with you through the most difficult times. So those people who with Allah when times were tough, they prove their sincerity. So what did Hatib do? Hatib was in a very tough position. All he hears is that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is preparing 10,000 troops and they're marching to Mecca. What does he think? Where does his family live again? Mecca. He thinks one of two things is going to happen. He thinks that either his family is going to get caught in the crossfire, or he thinks that as soon as Quraysh hears that this is happening, they're going to gather all the people they know who have family in Medina and they're going to hold them hostage. So what does he do? As a husband, as a father, as a brother, he writes a letter to Quraysh and he wants to tell them, hey, I know that you have no idea this is happening, but I'm telling you from Medina that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is preparing an army to march to Mecca. And he signs it, Hatib bin Abi Balta'a. Does that seem, is that difficult to process for some of you? It was for me. You have somebody who literally lived through the torture and harassment of the Muslims in Mecca, who took place in the Battle of Badr, who witnessed angels come down from the sky and help you win the Battle of Badr, who lived in Medina, his eyes used to lay on the face of the Prophet ﷺ every single day. You know, these are things that like we tell ourselves, man, I would never make a mistake if I lived in Medina. I would never miss a prayer if I lived with the Prophet. I would never. And look at this moment. This is literally the definition of treason. Quite literally. There's no other way about it. He gives the note to a woman that he knows, because it'll be less suspicious than him going himself. And he pays her and says, I want you to deliver this to the Quraysh in Mecca. Now, the Prophet ﷺ, he set up very strict exit points during this time. Nobody could leave Medina without there being some sort of notification. So this woman, she sneaks out, actually. She's able to sneak out, and she goes, Allah, God Almighty, revealed to the Prophet ﷺ that this all happened. He revealed to the Prophet ﷺ that there was, unfortunately, a message sent out to Quraysh. So the Prophet ﷺ takes Ali and Abdullah bin Zubair, and he says, guys, I want you to go to this city in this time, and you're going to see a woman there. She has a letter. I need you to get that letter back from her. They ride, they go, they find her. They tell her, are you the woman with the letter? She says, what are you talking about? They said, look, we were told that you have a letter. We have to retrieve that. She goes, I don't know what you're talking about. Ali says, look, either you're going to give it to us or we're going to have to take it from you. And we don't want to take it from you. Once she realizes that they know, she says, okay, give me a minute, turn around. She takes her hair down. That's where she tied it in her braid. And she hands it to Ali radiallahu anh. They come back to Medina. Hatib is in big trouble, right? This is a major, major point of treason. When Umar bin Khattab sees him, Umar says, he basically curses him, and he goes to the Prophet ﷺ and he says, Ya Rasulullah, remember we talked about the hypocrites, those people who on the outside they looked Muslim, but on the inside they wanted nothing more than for the Muslims to lose. He said, Ya Rasulullah, let me take care of this guy. I don't want to give the actual language, but he said, let me just take care of him. Right? Here today, gone tomorrow. The Prophet ﷺ said, let me speak to him. So he called him and he said, Hatib, tell me about what just happened. And Hatib said, Ya Rasulullah, I believe in God and I believe that you are the messenger of God. I have not changed at all. And he said, I have no doubt that this faith is true. He said, but I looked at my situation of my family in Mecca and I realized that my family is there, my children are there, and I'm not even from Mecca. We have no protection. We have no family that we can rely on, no support system. So as soon as this happens, as soon as this goes down, I thought about the pain that my family is going to go through when Quraysh finds out that their father, husband, brother lives in Medina. And I couldn't bear to think about it. So I thought at that moment that if I am the one who writes them a letter and shows them that I will warn Quraysh, that they will have mercy on my family when it comes time for my family. And he says, there is nothing more to it. I promise you that was it. No one paid me. I'm not an inside person. I'm not a spy. That's all. I promise you, Ya Rasulullah, that's it. The Prophet ﷺ, he said, what you have said is the truth. And Umar became upset. And the Prophet ﷺ, he looked at Umar and he said something very powerful to him. He said, Umar, how do you know that this man, after all he's done for God, after everything he's lived through for Allah, how do you know that Allah has not said about him that I have forgiven him for every sin that he will commit, that he has done and that he will commit for the rest of his life, and I guarantee him paradise? How do you know that? And when Umar heard this, he started to cry and he thought to himself, how could I have placed judgment on this person? Right? So this was a very powerful moment where the Prophet ﷺ taught us something very, very amazing. That when somebody makes a mistake, and this, by the way, was like a big mistake. This was a huge mistake. When somebody makes a mistake, it is not prophetic to completely have to wipe out to erase everything else that they have done. It is not prophetic to do that. When somebody messes up, yes, sure, that mistake, there needs to be justice. There needs to be, a process on how to handle with that mistake. We don't just let people oppress one another and say, oh, it's okay, they used to be good. No. There is justice for every transgression, right? If somebody says something, they have to apologize. But just because somebody has hurt you in one way does not mean that you forget every other good thing that they've ever done in their life. The Prophet ﷺ, he talked about this. And when he described this, to forget everybody's good when they've done bad, he said that this is one of the worst forms of ingratitude that a person can have. That when a person is ungrateful to their parents, because after everything their parents have done, their parents made a mistake. And it's a real mistake. Their parents made a real mistake, like a serious mistake. Said something really hurtful, right? Did something really painful. But because of that, now do we completely erase all the good that that person has done? Your friend, your spouse, whoever it might be. And by the way, this is a really difficult place to get to. Emotionally and spiritually, to be this forgiving is not easy. Many of us probably identified with Omar more in this story. We're like, yeah, right? He just put everybody at risk. Look at that selfishness. But the Prophet ﷺ, he reminds us that we are not God. We do not place judgment on somebody before God has judged them. That's not how we work. We handle things as they come, but we understand and trust that Allah Ta'ala has mercy for everybody. We'll stop here, inshallah. We'll pause. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us that mercy that He has and that the mercy that the Prophet ﷺ showed. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us that sincerity and that ability to be sincere in all of our moments and all of our relationships. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the strength to be forgiving. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the strength to be able to let go of whatever it is that is holding us back from Him. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the strength to hang on to whatever it is that is keeping us connected to Him. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us of all of our shortcomings, to grant us pardon and clemency for our mistakes, those that we committed while we knew that we were doing it, and those that we committed unknowingly. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep everybody in this gathering and everybody in this community and everybody in the world. We ask Allah to keep them safe and healthy, put blessing in their provision, do not put people in a trial in which they cannot bear, Ya Rabbil Alameen. We ask Allah Ta'ala to bless this gathering and to forgive us of our sins as we leave it. Ameen, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Barakallahu feekum, everybody. Jazakumullah khairan. Inshallah, just an update for everybody. We have now started doing 3 programs a week here at the space. Roots Outdoors, or Roots Unplugged, even though we're plugged in. We do Sunday night for 30 and up. We do Monday night for Heartwork, which is tonight, obviously. And then we do Thursday night for the college students with Brother Safi, inshallah. So if you know anybody in those demographics, obviously you're here for Monday night. But if you know anybody that would benefit, then please, inshallah, go ahead and let them know. I know that everybody's used to kind of being at home, but we want to kind of build up that community feel once again. And show we've taken on the initiative of doing these outdoors as long as the weather stays nice, which alhamdulillah, it's beautiful. It's really, really nice, alhamdulillah, here. So barakallahu feekum, everybody. We're going to pray Maghrib now, inshallah, and then we'll get going. Jazakumullah khairan wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.